And what I will do now is just pass you straight over to John Grace. He's Emeritus Professor at the University of Edinburgh, former President of the Botanical Society of Scotland, and the initiator of the Urban Flora project, which he's going to talk about today. So over to you, John.
Well, good morning, everybody. So welcome to the Urban Flora project of the Botanical Society of Scotland. Our project has been running now for 5 years, so we're quite well on in the process. We're beginning to think about analysis. The aim of the project is to describe and to understand the flora of our towns and cities all over Scotland. And of course, it's been an interesting year. Council workers and their knapsack sprayers have been locked down. And this means that plants can flourish in their full glory. And we've seen lots of plants that we've never seen before, like that lovage growing outside my house on the left-hand side. We've seen a lot of things that we haven't seen before. We've captured more data, even though we've been only making individual forays because our group meetings had to be cancelled. So let's move on and see what we've got for you this morning. Now, so what we do is we record species, their habitat, and their abundance. And we accumulate these data on the database called iRecord. And iRecord enables us to make maps and do various other things, and soon analysis. A milestone this year is that Brian Ballinger produced a checklist of the plants that we've found. So there are 1,200 species that we've discovered in urban sites. And recently we conducted a little poll amongst our group to see which ones we should consider for further analysis. And when we come to publication, which ones should we focus on? And so we've got 482 notable species. We call them notable species, of which 69 are neophytes. That's about 14.5%. And of these neophytes, 18 are relatively new arrivals. So there are quite a lot of new arrivals in Scotland. Of these 18, 10 are neophytes. But in my talk, I'm going to concentrate on these 18 new arrivals. Now, here they are. And what you can see here is some of them are fairly rare. Some you hardly ever see in Scotland. And I've indicated which ones are neophytes. They're the ones in red. And which ones are natives, rather few. Nonia lutea, for example, we found last year on the tram line, the Edinburgh tram line. We weren't the first people to see it, but I think we were the second people to see it. And Parieteria officinalis turned up in Edinburgh, found by Maria and David Chamberlain. I think it's one other site in Scotland, rather northern site. So we've got this list of interesting plants, and I think it can be expanded upon. Let's see something about them. Well, what we can see here is the first one I've picked to look at is water bent grass. It comes from the Mediterranean. And this grass has expanded its range in a most spectacular manner. It was hardly known in Britain in 1986, although there is a record at Galashiels in 1904, indicating a possible link with the wool industry. But look, in the 1990s, it was to be found in the south of England. It spread rapidly northwards, and entered Scotland in Edinburgh and Glasgow, and up there in the Moray Firth as well. So that's an interesting pattern of distribution. And then we go to the next one, the great lettuce, rather similar to the prickly lettuce, much taller and some other differences. And this one was southeastern in Britain and is spread up the east part of our nation, and is now present in both Edinburgh and Glasgow, and some records further north as well. And then we have Pampas grass. There are two species of Pampas grass. They are sometimes confused. I've confused them in the past. In fact, this interesting tweet by Mick Crawley sets us straight. So the one on the left, the one that looks like lollipops, comes from Argentina, and it's selloana. And the one on the right that looks rather drooping and melancholy comes from New Zealand. Now, the one on the left is a bit more common in England than in Scotland, and the one on the right, a bit more common in Scotland than England. But if we focus on selloana, we can see that it was southwestern, and it has expanded its range and is found in Scotland and is becoming more common in Scotland. Both of them are widely available at garden centres, and I suppose their dispersal is largely aided by human activities. In fact, last night I walked down my street and there are seedlings of Cortaderia richardii along the pavement, growing next to the road, quite a lot of them. And now we've got the Mexican fleabane, a rather happy looking little plant, a daisy with pink tinges. And likewise, it's available at garden centres. It appeared particularly in the southwest and then has spread further north and is now in Scotland, and even far north it can be found. And then the fleabanes, Edinburgh VC 83 has got 4 of these Conyza species. And the one on the left, the photo on the left, it shows a fleabane trying to enter the Edinburgh College of Art by the side door, because when I took this picture, which was around, I think, the end of June or maybe the beginning of July, no one was around to pull up the weeds. And there it is. That's how it likes to grow. And we can see that it is a relative newcomer to Scotland, and it has gradually moved, and it's now quite regular in certain parts of Scotland, lots of it in Edinburgh. And I found it last year in Ayr, next to the theatre. Now, what do we do with data like this? Well, we like to ask the question, what are the special attributes of these 18 species that enable them to travel north? And if we want to investigate the attributes of a group of species that we've identified, then one way to do it is to go to this publication by Mark Hill and others, published by the Centre of Ecology and Hydrology, which lists the attributes of some 1,887, I think it is, species. And so we can pick out the species of interest and we can do some analysis. So, for instance, here are some data. We're looking at the July temperature from which the plants come in Britain. We're looking at the precipitation of their sites. We're looking at Ellenberg's nitrogen values for the species, and we're looking at the Ellenberg pH or reaction, of those particular species. So if we take the whole of the 1,887, which is a kind of approximation to the British flora, we can see that they come from a temperature regime of about 14.9. The precipitation is 1,031, and so on. Now, if we take our notable neophytes, well, they come from somewhat warmer climes and rather drier and rather higher in nitrogen and rather higher in pH as well. And so we can say that these notable neophytes, they have a kind of a tendency to like warm, dry, calcareous sites. And if we look at the new ones, the 18 that I mentioned, although not all are present in Plant at the database, we can see it's even more true that they like these warmer, drier, and calcareous habitats. And all of them, and I'm only shown 8 here, all of them are found quite widespread in Europe. And you can see that we in Scotland are at the northern fringe of their distribution, and they barely get into Scandinavian countries. They're rather similar distributions, 1 or 2 differences. So this one, the Senecio, and the Mind Your Own Business plant, they don't like very hot places. So there are some differences, but some overall similarities. So you can see where this is going. We have the hypothesis that some European species are spreading northwards in response to climate change. And it's interesting that if you look at the patterns of distribution, you can see they tend to avoid the high ground, which of course is colder. And if they spread north, they tend to cling to the east. And there's an interesting consistent colonization pattern. Many of these species, they go to Edinburgh and Glasgow first before they go to the rest of Scotland. And are we talking about the urban heat island effect? Well, I came across this paper in a building technology journal, not a journal I browse often, but a group at the Met Office have looked into this urban heat island effect. And the map on the right shows the July temperatures, where red is warmer than the surrounding rural sites. And you can see that London is pretty warm, 2 degrees warmer than the surroundings. And so is Birmingham and Manchester and Liverpool. But if we move to Scotland, we see just a little bit of warming around Glasgow, hardly perceptible around Edinburgh, and strangely up there in the Moray Firth, a little pink spot. So it's not a huge difference between cities and rural areas. Let's look at climatological gradients in Britain. On the right-hand side, you can see the temperature anomalies for summertime. And what this highlights is massive interannual variability, which I think we know as humans, as gardeners and as botanists. On the left-hand side is the absolute temperatures. And what we see here is in the summertime, the lowlands of Scotland and the coastal areas, and particularly up there in the Moray Firth, is between 12 and 14 degrees average temperature in the summer, compared with about 16 in England. So it's a 2 to 4 degree difference between England and Scotland. And what about climate warming? Well, here's recent compilation of the data, 2020. And the green one is Scotland. And you can see the trend of warming fairly clearly in relation to the long-term averages. And what we can say there is that since about 1980, Scotland has warmed by about 1 degree, no more. And we can do a sort of back of the envelope calculation. This is a bit speculative, but we can say that if it continues to warm by 1 degree every 30 years, and if Scotland stays 3 degrees colder, then the back of the envelope calculation says it would take 90 years for south of Scotland to reach the south of England's temperature. And that implies that the isotherms, they're migrating at 15 kilometers per year. Now, the question arises, wind-dispersed species, can they move that fast? Well, I think some of them probably can, and some of them can't. Some of them require a bit of help from human beings and from motor cars, and particularly motor car tires to get around. But probably most species can migrate at that rate. So we can make some conclusions. We're seeing migration of a number of species from southern to northern Britain. I believe that the cause is rising temperature. There are other possible causes too. The characteristics of these species, their attributes, are well suited to urban habitats. Some of them may become invasive. Some are invasive in other countries, in other regions. And if this carries on, then northern Britain will become more species rich, more biodiverse in thermophilic plants. And of course, in a meeting like this, I needn't add that biological recording of the sort that we all do is more relevant than ever to track these changes. No, the Urban Flora is a team effort. A number of people, those listed here, have contributed through our monthly meetings and our field meetings, ideas, planning, knowledge of plants, organization, discussion, photos, and data. We also have many others. We work often with other societies, the BSBI quite often, and various natural history groups. And we welcome newcomers, particularly those who know their plants, but even beginners. Oh, that's the end. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, John. I think we've got time for just one question. There are a lot of questions coming in, and perhaps you can have a look at them on the Q&A and maybe answer some of them or later by typing them in, or we can have another go at them in the Q&A at lunchtime. But there's just one question which is I'll put to you now. And that question is from Susan Thomas, who asks, might the plants discovered first in Edinburgh and Glasgow reflect the density of recorders there?
Yes, I think that's right. Everything we do as field botanists, I suppose there are two basic assumptions that underlie everything we do. One is that we all know our species, and the other thing is that there is a more or less uniform density of recorders. And many times those basic assumptions are violated. That's how life is. So it is possible that the early appearance of plants in cities is because more botanists live in cities. I agree. Don't know what you can do about it though.
Okay, thank you very much, John.